Over the course of Nicole's and my relationship, and especially our marriage, I've had to learn a lot about resolving conflict. Yeah, conflict takes two parties. And there are a lot of different genres of conflict within any relationship, and particularly within a marriage. On the one hand, there are the big things, those things that we need to be lockstep on, like on the same page, knowing that we're moving in the same direction, working through the ways that I've hurt her, she has hurt me, those like big things that we have disagreements about, and that we need to come to a conclusion on, that we need to come to some consensus that will work for both of us, a compromise that will lead us forward. And then there's another genre of conflict that are more, let's say, of us, a fundamental difference of opinion. These are things like exactly what temperature the air conditioning or heat should be set at. I'm sure all of you have your lists. You know those little things that are just never going to come to a consensus about. One of those for us was exactly how bed should be made. Yeah. I have very strong, and I would like to add, correct opinions. that very careful order need to be taken to make sure the same amount of the blanket is dangling off both sides so that there's no inequities, and that there is a correct way to stack sheets, pillows, blanket, throw pillows. You have just the right amount of length of all of it so that everyone is comfortable. Nicole thinks things should be done a little bit differently. And she's not here to tell her side of the story. No, but it's one of those incredibly small things that in the grand scheme of things means absolutely nothing. But in the context of relationship and living with each other day in and day out, particularly in the 2 years that we spent just the two of us in our apartment through COVID, it seemed to matter a lot. But as time has gone on, and maybe having a kid has helped this, it's fallen much further down the list of important things. And it's been one of those places that I've realized, sometimes it's okay just to have different opinions. We don't need to agree on every single thing, that we don't need to every point of disagreement to come to some consensus where we think exactly the same thing and believe the same thing and we have exactly the same way of doing things. Within the context of a relationship, some of those differences and disagreements are all right. They're things that we can live with, things that, in fact, are healthy within any relationship between two people. And those kinds of disagreements don't just happen between individuals. They also happen in communities. I think about roommate situations or communal living situations in which we've had to navigate differences of opinion over how the fridge should be organized and who gets what space, what goes where, how many condiments is too many condiments, disagreements over what constitutes the kitchen being clean. I'm sure you can think of any number of these things in a shared office situation. Disagreements over just how strong that pot of coffee made in the morning should be, when and how the coffee maker should be taken care of, et cetera, et cetera. Any number of these things, can be points of just disagreement, of different opinions, of equally valid positions that may or may not be easily resolvable. The same is true in the church. As nice as it would be, we are not going to see eye to eye on everything. I could poll all of you in the congregation about any number of things. How our worship should be done. How the prayer books and hymnals in the pews should be organized. How many candles should be on the altar. What hymns are best. And you're going to have different opinions. And they don't all need to be points in which we talk it through and come to some consensus about. We are different people We are coming to the space with different experiences and different backgrounds. We have different theologies, different things that are important to us in the context of a worship service, different parts of our faith that are most sacred to us, different ways of praying, different ways of wanting to inhabit the church space on a Sunday morning. In his letter to the Romans, Paul is writing about this kind of situation. Welcome the weak among you, not so that you can quarrel about opinions. It's not clear whether he knows exactly what's going on in the church in Rome or not. It's a community that he's never been a part of, has never been to in person, that he knows through his contacts who have contacts in Rome. And so he's writing to them as an authority in the church writ large. And so there's some uncertainty about the extent to which he is responding to very particular conflicts versus just giving general advice of how a church should function. And in this reading we have today, he's dealing with the situation or confronting the reality that this church in Rome is made up of a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds. So he names some of those differences in practice. Those who eat anything, those who eat only vegetables, those for whom certain days are sacred, those for whom all days are the same. He's addressing a community in which some people have come to the church and come to know Jesus from a Jewish background, for whom the kosher law is incredibly important, for whom commandments to obey the Sabbath and obey one's father and mother, all of those 10 commandments are still vital parts of their life. They are a part of this community, as are those who are coming from a Greek and Roman context, who know nothing about kosher dietary laws, for whom the Sabbath is just the same as any other day. And yet there they are. They all find themselves as part of one community, one church, one body of Christ. And Paul's helping them figure out how it is that they can hold it all together. As he goes on in this letter, what he emphasizes is not the differences among them. He acknowledges the differences that are there and commends the church in Rome not to focus on those, to accept the fact that people in this community are coming from different places, that they have different experiences, that they're coming at their faith from different perspectives. And that's good. That is what separates this church, shaped by the life and love of Jesus Christ, from other religious movements before it. It's not a Jewish movement. It's not a Gentile movement. It's not a Roman movement. It's not a Greek movement. But in God there is neither Jew nor Greek nor slave nor free nor man nor woman. And it's a church in which all of those divisions cease to matter in comparison with the love of God that has been shown to the church. And we hear something similar happening in Matthew's gospel. Peter is wondering how it is that they can navigate situations where one member of the church has harmed or sinned against another. Do we forgive them as many as 7 times? Jesus says no. Forgive them 77 times. Never stop forgiving. Never stop working through differences and finding ways to continue to be in community with one another. In both of these readings from Romans and from Matthew's gospel, what Paul and what Jesus are saying is ultimately that what unites the church together is not having the same opinions or thinking the same things or being perfect people, perfectly aligned with the teachings of Jesus, perfectly aligned with what the church as a whole believes. What holds together the church together is grace. It's the grace of God that has been made known to them through the life and the death of Jesus Christ. It's the grace of God that has been revealed to them through Jesus' life of love. and through the love that they have shown one another. It is grace that binds the church together. Grace that allows for there to be different opinions, different beliefs, different practices, and yet for it all to work. For the community still to function as a single whole, with a single purpose, a single hope. And that is that the love of God will be fully realized in their midst. And all that God asks in return, all that Paul writes to the letter to the Romans that is needed in return, all that Jesus says is needed in turn through the parable that he tells, is that the church show the same grace that has been showed to them. Is that the church seek through all that it does, not to let that grace stop with them, but to be a vessel for that grace in the world. And each member of the church would show the same grace that God has shown them to one another, and that they would radiate that grace outward. This letter that Paul writes to the Romans, the words that Jesus says to Peter, are not just for the church then. They're not just for those individual communities in Rome and Matthew's own community that he was writing for. These are words for the church then as well as the church now, the church here and the church everywhere. A reminder that all that we do, at the center of it is God's grace. And it is only through that grace that we are able to function as one body, to come together as one community, despite our differences, with all of our differences of opinion and perspective, differences of background and belief, and sit in the same pews every Sunday morning and hear the same words of Scripture, hear the same sermon, and experience the same love of God. Last Sunday, we had a conversation over lunch in Dallas Hall. It was this beautiful time of coming together, these 6 tables completely full, folks sharing a meal together, and also reflecting on this church. And one of the questions we addressed was similar to the question that Paul is dealing with here, about how the church welcomes new folks. Not just new people, but how the church welcomes all who come to it. And just as Paul is writing to the Romans, describing a situation in which there are differences of opinion, I heard a lot of different opinions. When we talked about what it means to be a welcoming church, it turns out we weren't all on the same page. I heard some people who thought that we really needed newcomers to stand up during the announcements and introduce themselves, share their name and where they were coming from. And I heard other people who said, if you make me stand up in the middle of the announcements, I'm going to run out that door as fast as I can. Similarly, I heard we really need to be better about inviting people to coffee hour. And I heard, please don't invite me to coffee hour, I'll come when I'm ready. And to me, it was symbolic of something larger in the church. That is that we have different opinions. And so often I feel like in the church we feel like we need to come to consensus on everything. We need to have one approach, one take. But that's not always going to be the case. Because we are different people from different backgrounds with different perspectives who bring different life experiences, different experiences of God's love. The way that you have known God is not necessarily the way that I have known God, and the way you have experienced God's love is not going to be the way that someone else has. None of us has the whole picture of who God is and how God is at work in the world. And yet all of us, by virtue of us being here, have encountered the grace of God in one way or another. And that is what binds us together. We don't all share the same political perspective or the same stance on social issues. We don't all share the same way of worshiping, the same aesthetic sensibilities about what the worship service should look like. We don't all pray the same. Yet we have all known the same grace of God that has been given to us through the life, teachings, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And I think that is one of the greatest things that the church has to offer our world. This sense of community that transcends differences of opinion. It's a community that isn't siloed off into separate camps based on these tidy lines of what I believe and what party I'm a part of and what faction I'm in. But that is able to come together with and despite all of our differences, and to be united by that which we have in common, that which is greater than anything else, the grace of God that has been shown to us in Jesus Christ. And so on this day, I pray that we may continue to receive that grace, that we may experience it at work in our own lives and throughout our community, drawing us closer to God and also drawing us closer to one another. That it may be the grace of God that binds us together, the grace of God which animates all parts of our lives, the grace of God that shines through us, both in our interactions with one another and as we leave this place and go out into the world. May that great grace surround us. May it dwell within us, and may it guide us in all that we do.